In the last few weeks, I've really been enjoying the resurrection of an old contemporary Christian music evangelical pop song in a new form. The song is called Testify to Love, and the band Avalon put it out back in 2002 as a sort of bubblegum, poppy little light celebration. And about a year after they did that, they kicked out the lead singer who had sung the song for being gay, which unfortunately in the evangelical music world is not a big surprise. But we fast forward about a quarter of a century, and the song has reemerged as a surprise hit, sung by the same man, now an openly gay man of faith. His name is Michael Passons, also sung by the openly gay country singer Ty Herndon, and featuring Melissa Green, who was also a member of this evangelical group at the time they released the song, and she later left it when she went on her religious deconstruction journey. And so the song has been reimagined as a song about the deep and profound inclusive love of God for all people. And what's amazing is that this has been done without changing a single word in the song, which just makes me think God has a great sense of humor. They really should have known better back in 2002, because the first line was all the colors of the rainbow, and I'm like, what were you all thinking? Did you not know what rainbows meant? But anyway, when they remade the video for the song, and I watch it almost every day, I find it so meaningful, they've tacked on a little slide to the very end after they stop singing. And the closing slide reads, "God's love is for everyone, no exceptions." And I won't lie, that brings me to tears just about every time I see it. As I mentioned before, we are concluding Pride Month right now, which seems like a perfect time to talk about the two core religious paradigms in Christianity. The paradigm that informed and infused the original release of the song and the firing of its lead singer, and the paradigm that infuses the new version of it today. And of course, I mean fear and love. Now, if you're on our mailing list and you happen to read the pastoral message this last week, a little bit of what I have to say today will be familiar, but I think most of it will be new. And when we think about the competing paradigms of fear and love in Christianity, it is true that Pride Month is a great time to talk about them, but really these paradigms are not just about sexuality or gender identity or queerness. I think all of us in our different ways struggle with this question of where is love in a religion that too often seems to be about fear. So what is fear and what is love? Fear is what happens when we human beings remake God in our own image, and specifically when we remake God in the image of all that is the worst about us. Our pain, our shame, our cruelty, our grasping, our need to be right, our hatred of others. That leads to fear, because then we wind up with a God that looks like the worst of us. Love, in contrast, is what happens when we recognize that all of us are made in the image of God. Every single one of us, we all carry a sacred spark. And so we get to today's scripture. Very simple. God is love, and nothing can separate us from God's love, right? Well, at the risk of being controversial, I think Paul was wrong. There is something that can separate us from God's love. One thing: our own fear. And so when the Johannine community, writing the first letter of John, says that perfect love casts out fear, I'm afraid we also look at the world around us today, don't we? And we recognize that perfect fear also casts out love. And so we have to decide, to quote the musical Rent, whether we are going to give in to love or live in fear. But it's not that black and white, because for most of us, we are not either in fear all the time or in love all the time. It'd be great to be in love all the time. I think most of us are kind of riding the continuum between love and fear, and on good days, we're in the love paradigm, and on bad days, we're in the fear paradigm. And I'm calling them paradigms because this is not just about our emotions. This is not just about feeling loving or feeling afraid. It would be simpler if it were. But actually, love and fear are ways of orienting ourselves to the entire world. They're ways of making priorities, making sense of things, making decisions, making choices. So let's start with that fear paradigm. It has a bunch of different components, and the first one that feels really important for me to mention is a scarcity mentality. The idea that we don't have what we need, there is not enough, we are not enough. For whatever reason or reasons, things are limited, and it's a zero-sum competition. We have to compete, and we have to beat others because we can only win if they lose. And so unsurprisingly, with that scarcity mentality, we get an experience or a sense of isolation. We feel that we are alone, separate, maybe even abandoned. We feel like we are too much for the world, or we are too little for the world, or no one understands us, or if people really knew us, they wouldn't like us. I don't know about you, I certainly struggle with that one. And once we have a scarcity mentality and a sense of isolation, our nervous systems kick in, and we wind up with these really hyper-activated, hyper-vigilant, survival-oriented nervous systems that experience life as that zero-sum competition where anything and anyone can become a threat to our well-being or our survival or our having enough. And so we become hyper-vigilant, we become self-protective. And over time, as a result, what this fear paradigm does is it constricts us, it shrinks us. It's a little bit like the Grinch, whose heart was 2 sizes too small. And so in our constriction, in our fear, in our tightness, we find ourselves insecure or jealous or envious of other people who seem to have what we think we want, or we resent other people who seem to have what we think we want. Now, this may be a wild overgeneralization, and I say this as an individual person, as someone who thinks about ethics as a pastor, as someone trained in sociology. I think the great overwhelming majority of our problems in our individual lives, in our hearts and minds and souls and bodies, but in our relationships with one another and our problems in our world more broadly, all come down to this fear paradigm, to this sense in which we are living out of a sense of not enoughness, of scarcity, of competition. It explains so much of our individual pain. It explains so much social inequality and so much economic inequality as well. And so fear is a major problem. But fortunately, we have this other option. We have this love paradigm, and that starts with an abundance mentality. We have everything we need by this way of thinking. And what we need is within us, and it is not dependent on the world, and it's not dependent on the ups and downs of our daily lives. Maybe some of you know a gospel hymn, "This joy I have, the world can't take it away. The world didn't give it to me, so the world can't take it away." And within this abundance mentality, we understand that there is enough and we are enough, and the world would have enough if we merely distributed what we have on the basis of loving our neighbors as ourselves. And within this love paradigm and within this abundance mentality, we are able to connect to one another, to be in relationship with our deepest selves and our friends and other people in society and the sacred. And when we have a sense of abundance and a sense of connection, our nervous systems cool out and calm down, and they are relaxed and they are less triggered, and so we can be fully present with ourselves and with each other and with the world and with the sacred. And in that presence, we're able to be here because we trust that the world is safe. The universe is safe. God is good. And so it is safe to be at ease and joyful. And if this feels really awkward, I promise I'm going to get back to that point in a moment. From within the love paradigm, anyone and anything can become not a threat, but an occasion for delight, an occasion for service to others. Our towel again. And we become not so much hypervigilant, but vessels. We become vessels of God's grace and glory. And when we are in this love paradigm, within this abundance, love expands us where fear constricted us. Our hearts, like the Grinch's, grow 3 sizes. And when we are expanded by love, we are not in the midst of jealousy or resentment or insecurity or rage, but instead we experience awe and gratitude and wonder, humility, generosity, hospitality. Now we come by our fear really honestly. It's not like we have the simple option about which of these paradigms to be in, and the world gives us complete evidence that they're both true and it's just up to us. No, many of us have been harmed by the world. Many of us have been traumatized, and probably all of us have been taught to believe, to one extent or another, that the fear paradigm is the appropriate response to the way the world is. But Jesus' followers had been taught the same thing. They had been taught the fear paradigm. And he offered them good news. And this news is so good that I'm going to say this twice. Jesus' good news was that it is possible to live in the love paradigm, even in a society organized around the fear paradigm. That's wild, isn't it? We can elect to move toward living in the love paradigm, not in the fear paradigm, even though everything around us, all the evidence of our eyes and ears, the society we encounter says we need to live in the fear paradigm, but we don't. Jesus says we don't. And so that is what we are doing here at Vista Grande Community Church. We are trying to spend less time in that fear paradigm and more time in that love paradigm. Some of you know that I am a football fan, and because I watch a fair amount of football, I think a fair amount about sports as a sociologist, and I notice that rule 1 in football and most sports is there is a winner and there is a loser. Or if it's an individual sport, there is a winner and a whole bunch of losers, right? And that's just how it is. That is how football is set up. And we look at the world and we see the same degree of competition. But football is not the world. If we choose to create sports and recreational activities that are built around rules of competition, a zero-sum competition, so be it. We chose that, and we could change it, but we're not going to. No one is going to make football into a game in which everybody wins. That's just not happening. But we could make the world, we could make our society, we could make our communities into places where we are not living in zero-sum competition. We human beings set up the competition of the world. We did inherit it, but we keep it going and we can change it. And just because we're not going to change it in the NFL doesn't mean we can't change it elsewhere. We can pursue the psychological healing work and the spiritual growth and ethical development that will help us calm our overtaxed nervous systems and encounter peace and ease and joy. We can build relationships and connections among one another that will allow us to feel less alone, less abandoned. And we can pursue work in the world that allows there to be enough for everyone. Sometimes we call that justice work. Sometimes we call that politics. All that really is about is abundance. How do we make sure that everyone has access to abundance? Because I know for sure that we have the resources, we just don't share them properly. In a couple of weeks, I will be starting a long sermon series called Words with Baggage, and we will encounter and consider and think together about some of the Christian terminology that for some of us has become very triggering or very alienating or very unhelpful. Words like sin, salvation, discipleship, evangelism. Words that a lot of us find a little cringeworthy if we're honest. But I think we need to spend some time engaging with them. And so I wanted to have today's sermon focus on this love-fear distinction, partly to help us remember that we can move into this encounter with these triggering words from a space of love and abundance and an understanding that these words cannot harm us. But also, I think that this love-fear paradigm fight really explains why those words are harmful so often. When a word like sin is harmful, or a word like hell, or a word like evangelism, when it triggers us, when it bothers us, it's because that word has come to us out of a place of the fear paradigm and all the things that go with the fear paradigm. And so I'm going to ask us to consider what those words might be like if we approach them from the love paradigm. I did this a little bit in my pastoral message this week, which talked about that major trigger word, sin. And so today, rather than continuing that, I want to talk for just a couple of minutes about the term salvation from these two paradigms. And of course, that's tied to heaven and hell, but I'm not going to say much about those. What role does the fear paradigm play in how we have been taught to think about salvation? Well, this is pretty obvious. If we believe the wrong things or do the wrong things or piss off God in any way at all, for any reason at all, we are going to suffer eternally in torment, separated from God, separated from love, in endless, brutal, cruel pain, right? That is what we have learned about not getting salvation, and why we might not get it and what happens to us. Now, I want to point something out. Maybe some of you have thought of this. In any human life, we could cause a lot of harm, but we cannot cause endless, eternal harm because our lives are limited to some number of decades. Hopefully many decades, but still limited. And so, some decades ago, I realized that the idea that we might suffer eternally in hell for limited harm, that we might suffer in an unlimited, endless way for harm that we caused that was at a maximum limited to our lifetimes, is disproportionate. It is just a morally wrong way to think about justice or fairness, because no one can do enough harm to merit suffering eternally. And what that tells me is that vision of hell, that vision of failing to be saved, that's just plain old human cruelty. That has nothing to do with God's goodness or God's love. That is us projecting onto God the worst of who we can be. So what did Jesus think of salvation? I wish I had come up with this phrase myself. I didn't, but I find it very helpful. For Jesus, salvation was not about getting us into heaven. It was about getting heaven into us. It was not, for the most part, about what happens to us after we die. It's about what we can experience here and now. And so in the Lord's Prayer, when Jesus teaches his disciples to pray, "Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven," he is asking them to pray that we be saved now. Not that we go to heaven when we die, but that we live in joy and abundance and delight and gratitude and love right now. And so salvation is about what we can experience when we are in that love paradigm. If you are interested in linguistics, you may notice that there is a word that's sort of like the word salvation, and that's the word salve, S-A-L-V-E. It means a healing ointment or a balm, B-A-L-M, not B-O-M-B, just to be really clear. But you may remember there's a hymn about a balm in Gilead, a healing salve and an ointment. And so salvation is related to healing and wellness and wholeness and shalom. Now this Jewish word shalom means peace, but it doesn't only mean peace as the absence of violence or peace as the absence of war. It is a much more creative understanding in the Jewish tradition from which Jesus comes. And so here I'm going to quote a Christian ethicist named Thomas Crisp, because his definition of shalom is the best one I have found in 60 years. He defines shalom as, and I quote, "the state of a community in which the sustenance, safety, freedom, and dignity of all people are secure." Let's hear that again. Salvation, shalom, peace, heaven on earth, is the state of a community in which the sustenance, safety, freedom, and dignity of all people are secure. Can you imagine that? Would that not be wonderful? That is what Jesus is inviting us to help co-create through our personal growth, our acts of love, our work in the world, our worship. And so this is the spirit in which we are going to engage with Christianity's trigger words from the middle of July to the middle of November. And I want to mention one more thing about that sermon series. Understanding that those words have really hurt some of us, I am going to remain after church for several hours every Sunday that we cover one of these words. I am going to stay here because I want to listen to your stories of how you have engaged with these words, how these words have harmed you. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to say that you're wrong, you're not wrong. I just want to receive and hold your experiences with these difficult words. And so every day that we have a Words with Baggage sermon, I will be here simply for pastoral presence into the afternoon if you want to stay after and tell me your story or the stories of your loved ones. I end as I always do with questions for the week and a prayer for us all. The questions for the week I'm going to start adding to the pastoral message that I send out every Monday, because it has been pointed out to me that if I say them now, you will have forgotten them by the time we all walk out the door, and that's fair. So if you receive our e-blasts, if you're on our mailing list and you read the pastoral message, you will start seeing these in the pastoral message every week. 3 questions today. How are you living in the fear paradigm, and with what effects? How could you move into the love paradigm? And what would change if you knew in your deepest self that, as that slide at the end of the video of Testify to Love says, that God's love was for everyone, no exceptions, including you, whoever you are and wherever you are on life's journey? What would change if you really believed that? I call this closing prayer a prayer for us all, because God knows I need this prayer as much as anyone else in this gathered community or anyone else watching this sermon later. And today I could think of no better prayer for us all than to take the chorus of the song Testify to Love and tweak the lyrics a little bit so that instead of it being the prayer of an individual, it becomes the prayer of a community. For as long as we shall live, may we testify to love. May we be witnesses in the silence when words are not enough. With every breath we take, may we give thanks to God above. For as long as we shall live, may we testify to love. Amen.